Nadine Carter kept a cardboard sign in a tube in the back of her bedroom closet for 2 years. A strip of poster board, 22 inches long, written in purple marker in the careful, oversized handwriting of an 8-year-old, Lemonade 50. Eli's medicine. Her daughter Amara had made it on a Friday night in January, pressing hard with the marker the way children press when they want the letters to last, and had carried it to the corner of her grandparents' street in Birmingham, Alabama, the following Saturday morning, and held it up at passing cars until enough people stopped. She had done this every Saturday for 11 months. She had mailed the money to her mother in Memphis in white envelopes she addressed herself, in the same careful handwriting as the sign, because at 8 years old she understood that her brother was sick, and her mother was alone, and the only thing she had to give was her Saturdays. The sign came home with Amara when Eli was finally discharged, folded once inside her backpack, and Nadine had found it while unpacking, and had stood in the hallway of the apartment with it in her hands for a long time before she put it in the tube and put the tube in the closet, because she did not know what else to do with something that was too important to throw away and too large to look at every day. On a Tuesday in October, at the Fremantle Studios in Atlanta, Georgia, Steve Harvey held that sign on the stage of Family Feud and said 5 words that caused the studio to go silent in a way it had not been silent in 23 years of tapings. And what happened after those 5 words was the reason Nadine Carter drove home from Atlanta believing, for the first time in 2 years, that her family was going to be all right. Nadine stood backstage in a green blouse she had ironed twice that morning, which was a thing she did when she was nervous, ironed things twice, then ironed them again. She was 38 years old, and she had the particular composure of a woman who had been through something that had no name for it on the other side, only the fact of having survived it, and who had learned to carry that survival quietly so the people around her did not have to manage its weight along with their own. Her mother was with her backstage. Amara was in the studio audience, in the 3rd row, in a red shirt, her braids pulled back, already scanning the stage with the alert attention she had carried since she was small, the attention of a child who had learned early that things could change quickly, and it was better to be paying attention when they did. Eli was not there. Or so Amara believed. But nobody in that studio knew what was about to happen next. Every morning for the 14 months that Eli was in treatment at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, Nadine had done the same thing before she went to his room. She had stood in the hallway outside the pediatric oncology ward, both hands flat against the wall, and she had said the same sentence out loud, quietly, to herself, "He is still here." It had started as a factual statement, a correction to the fear, a way of making her body believe what her mind knew, and had become, over 14 months, something closer to a prayer. She said it in the good weeks and the hard weeks, and the week in March when Eli's counts dropped so severely that 2 doctors had taken her into a small conference room and talked to her in the careful, measured way that meant they were preparing her for something she was not ready to. Here, she had driven back to the hotel that night, the extended stay hotel 6 blocks from the hospital where she had lived for 14 months on the hospital's family housing stipend and her own drained savings. And she had sat on the edge of the bed, and she had written a letter. To Amara. To Eli. To her mother. To her sister. She had sealed the letters, and then she had sat with them for a long time, and then she had put them in the drawer of the nightstand and not mailed them, because Eli was still there, and as long as he was still there, she was going to act like someone who believed it. She had called Amara every night, every single night for 14 months, without exception, 8 o'clock after Eli was settled. Amara had been living with her father's parents in Birmingham, a decision Nadine had made in the 2nd week. when it became clear that 14 months near a hospital in Memphis was not a life she could ask an 8-year-old to live through. The grandparents were warm and steady, and they had a house with a yard and a school 2 blocks away, and they loved Amara with the particular fierceness of grandparents who understand that the love they give is load-bearing. Amara had gone. She had not complained. She had packed her own bag, which had broken Nadine's heart in a way she still did not have language for. The sight of her 8-year-old daughter packing her own bag with the efficiency of someone who understood the necessity and was not going to make it harder. The lemonade stand had started in January, the 4th month of Eli's treatment. Amara had not told Nadine about it ahead of time. The first Nadine knew was when an envelope arrived in February, addressed to her in purple marker, with $23 inside, and a note that said, "For Eli's medicine. I made it myself. Love, Amara." Nadine had called immediately. Amara had explained the stand, the sign, the corner, the Saturdays. She said her grandfather helped her carry the table. She said she charged 50 cents because that was what felt fair. She said she had been doing it for 3 weeks before she mailed the first envelope because she wanted to make sure she could keep doing it before she told anyone. Nadine had said, "Baby, you don't have to do this." Amara had said, "I know, I want to." Nadine had said, "Put it in a savings account. For yourself." Amara had said, "No, it's for Eli." Nadine had not argued. She had understood, in the way parents sometimes understand their children's decisions before they understand them consciously, that this was not about the money. It was about Amara needing a shape to put her love into when the distance between Birmingham and Memphis was too large and she was 8 years old and there was nothing else she could do. She had said, "Okay, baby. Thank you." She had held the phone against her chest for a long time after they hung up. The envelopes came every 2 weeks for 11 months. Some had $18, some had $41. One, in May, had 67. Amara had explained in the note that a church group had stopped and bought everyone lemonade and tipped generously. The total, across all the envelopes, was $512. Nadine had kept every envelope. They were in a shoebox on the shelf above the closet where the sign was in its tube. The insurance situation had been its own separate battle. The coverage for Eli's treatment, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, standard risk, diagnosed at age 5, was routed through Nadine's employer plan, which covered the primary chemotherapy protocol. The complications came with the supportive care, the antifungal medications required during immunosuppression, the growth factors needed after 2 of the harder cycles, a specialized nutritional formula Eli required during a 3-week period when he could not tolerate standard feeding. Each of these had required separate prior authorization. 2 had been denied on the first request. 1 had been denied twice. The total out-of-pocket for the 14 months after insurance was $31,400. Nadine had paid $14,200 of it through a combination of savings, a home equity loan on an apartment she did not own, a personal loan from her mother, and a cancer assistance fund that had covered a one-time grant of $3,000. The remaining $17,200 was on a payment plan she had arranged with the hospital's financial services department, $340 a month, no interest, for 50 months. She had not told Amara any of this. Amara was 10 now. She knew her brother had been very sick and was better. She knew the family had been through something hard. She did not know the specific number. Nadine had decided she would not carry that particular weight into her daughter's childhood. Eli had been discharged in March, 14 months after diagnosis. He was 6 years old, and his counts were clean, and the oncologist had used the word remission with the specific, careful emphasis of someone who knows the word carries everything. Nadine had gone back to the hallway outside the pediatric oncology ward one last time, placed both hands flat against the wall, and said, "He is still here." Then she had gone in and helped her son pack his bag. Amara had come home from Birmingham the following week. She had walked into the apartment, seen Eli on the couch with his stuffed elephant, and stopped in the doorway. She had not run to him. She had stood there for a moment, looking at him, the way you look at something you have been afraid of losing so long that seeing it still there requires a moment of recalibration. Then she had walked over and sat next to him and said, "Hi." Eli had said, "Hi." They had watched television for 4 hours. It was the best afternoon of Nadine's life. But Amara had never fully come home, not in the way Nadine had hoped. The 11 months in Birmingham had done what 11 months do. They had settled into Amara like a separate season, and the girl who came back was the same girl but longer, quieter in new places, with a watchfulness that had not been there before. She and Eli were gentle with each other, careful, the way people are with things that have been fragile and may still be. They had not talked about the lemonade stand. Amara had not brought it up. Eli, at 7, had only the vaguest understanding of what his sister had done. He knew she had sent money. He did not know about the Saturdays. The Family Feud application had been Nadine's sister's idea. The same reasoning it always was: you need a day that isn't this. Nadine had applied. The producers had called. The taping was in October. Nadine had arranged for her mother to bring Amara to Atlanta for the taping as a surprise. Amara thought she was coming for a fall break trip to visit her aunt. She did not know about the show. And she did not know, sitting in the 3rd row in her red shirt, that Eli was backstage with his grandfather, having traveled from Memphis the night before, also believing he was on a fall break trip. Neither child knew the other was there. Steve opened the taping with his usual warmth, his usual reach toward the crowd. He turned to Nadine's family and asked the standard questions. "Where are you from? Tell me something." Nadine's mother answered first. Then Nadine's sister. Then Steve turned to Nadine and asked her what the most important thing that had happened to her family in the last 2 years was. Nadine said, "My son survived leukemia." The audience responded. Warmth, applause, the instinctive human recognition of a hard thing survived. Steve said, "How old is he?" Nadine said, 7. Steve said, "Where is he today?" Nadine said, "He's home. He's healthy." Steve nodded. He said, "And how did your family get through 14 months of treatment?" Nadine paused. She looked at her mother. Her mother looked back with the particular expression of someone who knows what is about to happen and has already decided not to stop it. Nadine said, "My daughter helped." Steve said, "How old is your daughter?" Nadine said, "She's 10 now. She was 8 when Eli was diagnosed." Steve said, "What did she do?" Nadine was quiet for a moment. She said, "She sold lemonade every Saturday for 11 months in Birmingham, where she was living with her grandparents while I was in Memphis with Eli. She made a sign, and she set up on the corner, and she mailed me the money in envelopes every 2 weeks." She stopped. "I kept the sign. I have it at home." Steve said, "What did the sign say?" Nadine said, "Lemonade 50, Eli's medicine." The studio fell completely silent. Steve looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked up. He said, "You kept it?" Nadine said, "It's in a tube in my closet." Steve said, "Did you bring it?" Nadine's mother reached under her chair and produced a cardboard tube and handed it to Nadine, who handed it to Steve, who took it with both hands and opened it slowly. He unrolled the poster board on the podium, smoothing it flat with his palm, and he read it. Lemonade 50. Eli's medicine. The purple marker. The careful oversized letters. The period at the end, because Amara had believed even at 8 that sentences ended with periods. Steve Harvey pressed both hands flat on the sign and bowed his head for a moment. Then he looked up and said 5 words. She paid for his life. 300 people held their breath. The studio fell completely silent for the second time. Steve turned to the producer's booth. He said, "Stop the game. We're bringing them out." A producer said something through the monitor. Steve said, "Both of them." Now, he turned to the audience. He said, "There is a 10-year-old girl in this room who does not know her brother is here today. And there is a 7-year-old boy backstage who does not know his sister is sitting 30 feet away from him. And that is about to change." Amara was on her feet in the 3rd row before anyone had moved toward her. Because Amara always knew before anyone told her. She was scanning the stage with the alert attention she had carried since she was small. And her face was doing something it didn't do often. It was undone, the composure gone, the watchfulness replaced by something that had no defense in it at all. She said, "Is Eli here?" Steve said, "Go find him." A stage door opened on the left side. Eli walked out. He was 7 years old and he was wearing a blue shirt, and he was looking for his mother, and then he saw his sister, and he stopped. Amara was already moving, off the audience riser, through the gap in the railing, onto the stage in 3 steps, and then she was holding her brother the way she had not held him on the day he came home, when she had stopped in the doorway and recalibrated. She held him the way she had been holding the distance between them for 2 years. Both arms. Full weight. Her face in his shoulder. Eli's arms came up around her, and he held on and he said, into her ear, loud enough for the microphone to catch it, "For real home? Or just visiting home?" Amara pulled back and looked at him. She said, "For real." 300 people made a sound that had no name for it. Steve Harvey walked 4 paces from the podium, stood with his back to the cameras, and stayed there for 12 seconds. His shoulders moved twice. The crew members who were visible on camera were all looking at the floor. The boom operator had lowered his equipment. When Steve turned back, his voice was steady, but only barely. He said, "Let me tell you something." He sat down on the stage floor, full suit, no chair, and he spoke quietly to the room. "There was a night when I was at the lowest point of my life. I wrote letters to my family. I sealed them. I almost sent them." He paused. I didn't. Because I held on to something. A belief that there was a reason to stay. A plan bigger than the pain I was in. And I promised myself that if I ever got to the other side of it, I would look for that in other people, and I would help when I found it. He looked at Amara, who was sitting on the stage floor now with Eli in her lap, the 7-year-old entirely comfortable being held by his sister in front of 300 people. This girl got up every Saturday for 11 months. She made a sign with a purple marker. She charged 50 cents and she mailed the money in white envelopes, and she never asked for anything back. He looked at the sign, still flat on the podium. "I have been on this stage for 23 years. I have seen a lot of things. I have never seen that." He stood up. He was not done. He pulled his phone and called the chief of pediatric oncology at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis. The call connected on the 4th ring. Steve identified himself. He said he was calling about a patient named Eli Carter, age 7, recently discharged in remission, and that he wanted to understand what the outstanding financial balance on the family's account was, and what it would take to close it completely. The doctor said he would need to transfer the call to financial services. Steve said, I'll hold." He stood on the stage holding his phone, while 300 people watched in complete silence, and Amara held her brother in her lap, and Eli looked at the lights. The number came back. Steve said, "Pay it. Full balance. Tonight," he ended the call. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to Nadine. He said, "The sign is going somewhere it can be seen. Not your closet." He looked at the poster board on the podium. "This belongs in a frame, and I know exactly where." He announced that the sign would be displayed permanently in the pediatric oncology family waiting room at St. Jude, the room where parents sat during their children's treatment, the room where the hours were the longest and the walls had nothing on them that said, "Someone else was here," and they held on. He said, "Every parent who sits in that room is going to see what an 8-year-old did with her Saturdays, and they're going to know it's possible to hold on." He turned to the Nakamura family, the competing family, still at their podium across the stage, their grandfather sitting down now, no longer standing, because something about what he had witnessed had required him to sit. He walked across the stage and embraced Nadine without being asked, and said something into her ear that the microphone did not catch. He walked back and gave both families the full prize, without ceremony, because ceremony felt like the wrong register for what had just happened in that room. Steve turned to the camera. He said, "I want to talk to everyone watching at home. Somewhere tonight there is a child doing something nobody can see. Selling lemonade, saving coins, writing letters, showing up in the only way they know how for someone they love. They are not doing it for recognition. They are doing it because love finds a way when it runs out of other options." He looked at Amara and Eli, still on the floor, Eli now showing his sister something on his sleeve. She paid for his life, one Saturday at a time. 50 cents at a time. 11 months of Saturdays, and she never once asked him to know. The episode aired 9 weeks after the taping. In the first 48 hours, it was viewed 88 million times. By the end of the week, 251 million. The hashtag #ForRealHome trended in 28 countries for 12 days. The image of Amara holding Eli on the stage floor was used on the cover of a national parenting magazine. 3 children's hospitals contacted the foundation within 72 hours, requesting the sign's display program be extended to their facilities. Today, Eli is 9 and in full remission. He plays soccer on Saturday mornings. Amara is 12 and in 6th grade, and she is, her teachers say unanimously, the student who notices when someone else in the room is struggling before anyone has said a word. She started a tutoring program at her school for younger students who are falling behind. She runs it on Thursdays after school. She does not charge anything. The Lemonade for Life Foundation, established by Steve Harvey 3 months after the taping, dedicated to covering outstanding medical balances for pediatric cancer families and funding sibling support programs for children separated from their families during long-term hospital stays, has its motto from Eli's words on the stage, "For real home." In its first 18 months, it closed outstanding balances for 1,340 families across 38 states and funded 280 sibling reunification support programs in partnership with 11 pediatric oncology centers. The sign, Lemonade 50, Eli's Medicine, purple marker, careful letters, period at the end, hangs in the family waiting room of the pediatric oncology ward at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, in a plain wooden frame at eye level on the wall across from the chairs. Nadine was there the day they hung it. She stood in the waiting room where she had spent 14 months and looked at her daughter's handwriting on the wall, and she placed both hands flat against it. The way she had placed her hands flat against the wall outside that ward every morning for 14 months to say, He is still here. She stood like that for a long time. Then she went home. If this incredible story of Amara and Eli and the sister who gave her Saturdays so her brother could have his life touched your heart, subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. Share this with someone who believes it is never too late to find your way back to the people you love. Have you ever been separated from someone who mattered and found your way back to them? Or watched someone sacrifice quietly for a person they loved without ever asking to be seen? Share your story in the comments, because as Eli proved the moment he saw his sister on that stage, some things don't need explaining. Some things are just, finally, for real home.